The locker room was filled with almost absolute silence. Players concentrated, some checking their bandages, others breathing deeply, trying to control their anxiety before another big game. The coach talked about strategies, reinforcing the opponent's weaknesses and what needed to be done to guarantee victory. Everything seemed normal, the same ritual as always, but something was about to happen. Something that no one imagined, something that would change the atmosphere of that environment forever. Lebron James was there, listening attentively to the coach's words, but his expression suggested that his mind was elsewhere. He didn't seem to simply absorb the instructions of the game. There was a depth in his gaze, a more intense thought that went beyond the four lines of the court. Then, suddenly, he stood up, interrupting the moment with a gesture that no one expected. The teammates looked at each other, trying to understand what was happening. LeBron wasn't the type to break protocols before an important game, so his attitude already aroused a mix of curiosity and strangeness. He walked to the center of the locker room, took a deep breath, and gave a short speech. It wasn't something rehearsed. It wasn't one of those motivational speeches that normally happen before big clashes. There was something different in his voice, a contained emotion that would soon come through. Each player present in that space felt a shiver run through their body, as it was clear that something very significant was about to come. The way LeBron spoke indicated that this wasn't just another game, it wasn't just another day in his career. He was about to reveal something that would impact everyone in an unexpected way. The next few seconds seemed eternal. His every word carried a special weight, as if he was preparing his teammates for something that went beyond the universe of basketball. The tension in the air was palpable. Some players tried to decipher where that moment would lead. Others simply waited for the revelation, knowing that when LeBron James spoke, it was for a serious reason. No one imagined that that night would be marked not only by the dispute on the court, but by a gesture that would surpass any statistic or memorable play. What LeBron was about to do wasn't about winning. It wasn't about championship rings. It was something much bigger. Now stop for a moment and think. Have you ever lived in a moment when someone did something completely unexpected and changed everything around them? A gesture that seemed simple, but carried such meaning that you would never forget? Maybe it was a word at the right time, a generous attitude when you least expected it, or even a simple look that said it all without needing a single sentence. What LeBron James did that night wasn't just a surprise to his teammates. It was a moment that transcended sports, something that deeply touched everyone who was there, one of those moments that makes you rethink what really matters. Now I want to know, have you ever been through something like this? Share in the comments, a situation in which an unexpected gesture changed everything for you. I will read each story, and I'm sure other people will be moved by them too. The expectations for that game were unusual. It wasn't just another night in the NBA. It wasn't just another difficult opponent. The entire team felt the weight of responsibility on their shoulders. Fans were waiting for a spectacle. The media was already making predictions, and critics were expecting nothing less than an impeccable performance. Each player knew that they could not fail, that each error would be analyzed in the smallest detail, and that victory was the only acceptable option. The locker room was filled with this feeling. Some breathed deeply, others stared at the ground, focused on what was to come. But despite all this tension, no one there knew that the night would be marked by something much bigger than just a score. The coach talked about the game's strategy, the details that could define victory, the opponent's weaknesses that needed to be explored. But as much sense as his words made, there was a different vibe in the air. It was as if behind the concentration there was something latent, something that had not yet been said. And then everyone started to notice. LeBron James was different. It wasn't the usual fierce look before an important game. It wasn't that explosive energy he carried when he wanted to boost the team's morale. This time, there was an air of introspection about him, a deeper, more intense type of thinking, and that sparked everyone's curiosity. Players looked at each other, trying to understand what was happening. LeBron rarely disconnected from the moment of the game. He was the example of absolute focus, but something made him seem distant. There was a heaviness in his posture, a different shine in his eyes, and the way he breathed revealed that something was about to happen. When he stood up and spoke, the entire locker room froze. That wasn't part of the script, it wasn't expected, and that was exactly why no one could look away. What he was about to say wasn't just any motivational message. It wasn't a standard speech before a decisive match. It was something that would completely change the spirit of that team, something that no one would ever forget. LeBron James has always been more than a basketball player. On the court, he was a natural leader, someone who carried the weight of the team on his shoulders and never shied away from responsibility. But what set him apart from many other stars was what he did when the gym lights went out. Off the court, LeBron was an example of discipline, generosity, and intelligence, someone who understood his impact on the world and used his influence for something bigger than sport. And that night, in that tension-filled locker room, he was about to show a side that few have had the privilege of seeing up close. The silence in the room was absolute when he began to speak. He wasn't the LeBron of the game, the one who motivates the team with words of war before a battle. There was something different about the way he looked at each teammate, as if he wanted his words to be burned into their minds forever. He started talking about gratitude, about everything that basketball had given him, about how every moment spent there was a privilege that few in the world could experience. But then his voice changed, became deeper, more personal. He wasn't just talking about himself, I was talking about them, about everyone in that locker room. LeBron reminded everyone that as much as they were stars on the court, off the court, they were just men. Men who had stories, families, pains, and challenges that the fans would never see. He spoke about the difficulties they each faced to get there, about the sacrifices they made over the years. What happened next took everyone by surprise. He revealed something that he had been carrying with him for some time, something that no one there knew. And when he finished speaking, the impact was so strong that some players simply couldn't hide their emotion. That wasn't just any motivational speech. It was a profound reminder that behind the statistics, the million-dollar contracts, and the spotlight, they were people. And more than ever, they needed each other. When LeBron finished speaking, the entire locker room remained silent. But it wasn't an ordinary silence. It was one of those moments where words completely lose their meaning, where all that's left is the overwhelming feeling of something much bigger happening. Every player, every member of the coaching staff, even the staff nearby, stopped, not knowing exactly how to react. It was as if, for a moment, the weight of what had been said was still hanging in the air, and no one wanted to be the first to break that moment. Eyes met without any words being said. Some seemed to not believe what they had just heard. Others blinked slowly, processing the depth of what LeBron had just revealed. There was an intensity in each one's eyes, a mix of respect, surprise, and above all, a recognition that that moment was unique. For many there, it was the first time they saw LeBron James in a completely different light. Not as the legendary player, not as the statistics machine or the unbeatable leader on the court. They saw a man, a human being who carried something inside him that no one had ever suspected. One of the teammates leaned his back against the locker and let out a heavy sigh as if he was trying to find words to respond, but nothing came. Another just lowered his head, reflecting, feeling the weight of the moment. One of the younger players, who was still trying to establish himself on the team, widened his eyes and looked directly at LeBron, as if he couldn't believe that gesture was coming from someone he grew up watching on television. Even the veterans, accustomed to the responsibilities and pressures of the sport, seemed moved in ways no one could have predicted. LeBron remained still for a moment, observing the reactions without saying anything else. He didn't need to. What he had done spoke for itself. It was one of those rare moments when the impact of an action outweighs any words. And then, without warning, someone finally reacted, and what happened next would completely change the mood in that locker room forever. The locker room was still immersed in that emotionally charged silence when LeBron, taking his time, walked to a small closet in the corner of the room. All eyes were on him. No one dared to look away. What was he about to do? What else could happen after that revelation? Then, without any grandeur, without rehearsed speeches or any sign of ostentation, he pulled out a simple box, without any flashy packaging, without gold ribbons or anything that suggested a luxurious gift. But the weight of that box, even without anyone knowing what was inside, was gigantic. He held the object for a moment, took a deep breath, and bluntly looked directly at one of the youngest players on the team. That kid who was still finding his place in the NBA, the one who still felt the weight of the jersey and the weight of expectations. LeBron walked up to him, and with the same firmness he always showed on the court, but with a different shine, in his eyes, placed the box in his hands. The player, visibly confused, hesitated for a moment as if he didn't know whether he should open it there or wait. But a little wave from LeBron encouraged him to keep going. When he lifted the lid, the entire locker room held its breath. What was inside there wasn't money. It wasn't $1 million contract. It wasn't a luxury car or any other status symbol that many could imagine. What that gift carried was something infinitely more valuable. It was a memory, a piece of history, something that would transcend any material possession. Inside the box, carefully protected, was one of LeBron James's first jerseys, a piece that carried sweat, struggles, and the journey of a boy from Akron who dreamed of changing his life through basketball. But it wasn't just that. Next to the shirt was a handwritten letter. The player held the slate with shaking hands. It was rare to see LeBron write something personal. His words, however, were direct and powerful. He wasn't talking about wins or records. He wasn't talking about statistics or titles. He was talking about resilience, about believing in yourself when no one else does. He was talking about the defeats that shape a true champion, about the difficult days that build a legacy. This wasn't just any gift. It was a symbol, a reminder that greatness is not measured by trophies, but by the impact you leave along the way. And at that moment, everyone understood that that gesture was much bigger than any award or title won on the court. The player held the letter with his hands still shaking, his eyes going over each word written by LeBron. The locker room was still completely silent, as if everyone was afraid to interrupt that moment that seemed to have stopped time. But what no one knew yet was what motivated LeBron to do it. Why did he choose that player? Why that gift? That shirt? That wasn't a simple memory. It wasn't a random gesture. There was a story behind, something that would touch even the most skeptical and show that behind the basketball legend, there was a man who never forgot his origins. LeBron approached and placed a firm hand on the young player's shoulder, who was still trying to process everything that was happening. His voice, always loaded with authority on the court, sounded different now. He was not the disciplining leader nor the athlete looking for victory. It was the voice of someone who understood exactly what that boy was feeling, because he had once been in the same place. He began to tell his story, the story of when he was just a young man from Akron with no money, no structure, but with a dream that seemed impossible. He remembered the days when he went to training without knowing if he would have anything to eat when he got home, the nights when his mother, even though he had nothing, told him to never give up. And then one day he met a person who made a difference in his life, a veteran player who was already at the end of his career, but who saw something special in LeBron. This player didn't give him money. He didn't promise him fame. What he did was give something no one else could, a reminder of what he was capable of. That veteran handed LeBron a jersey and said, "The day you understand what this jersey represents, you'll be ready to leave your mark on the world." Years later, LeBron understood. It wasn't about the fabric, it wasn't about the name printed on the back. It was about everything she meant, about the journey, about the scars, about never forgetting where you came from. And now, he was doing the same. He was passing the flame forward. The young player, now holding a piece of LeBron's history, couldn't hold back his tears. And he wasn't the only one. The locker room seemed to have frozen in time. The young player held the shirt and the letter with such delicacy that he seemed to fear that any sudden movement could undo that moment. His chest was rising and falling rapidly, his heart racing. His gaze flickered between the historic piece and LeBron, as if his brain hadn't yet processed what had just happened. Was this real? Was he really receiving such a symbolic gift from one of the greatest players in history? The other players also seemed stuck in a state of disbelief. It was rare to see LeBron James so vulnerable, so open about his story and his motivations. Typically, he led by example on the court, with his intensity, his work ethic, and his thirst for victory. But this time, he chose to lead in a different way, giving a piece of his own journey to inspire another player to follow theirs. One of the team's veterans crossed his arms and shook his head, a slight smile of admiration appearing at the corner of his lips. Another rubbed his face, trying to hide his emotion, while one of the younger ones simply mumbled, "Wow," unable to say anything else. There was something about that gift that transcended any trophy or statistic. It was as if LeBron had just proven that true greatness isn't just in records and titles, but in the legacy you build along the way. The coach, who had followed the team for years and had seen everything in the world of basketball, took a deep breath and scratched his head. He knew LeBron was a different leader, but that went beyond any motivational speech or conventional attitude. He was witnessing something rare, something that only happens when an athlete truly understands their impact on the world and decides to use it to transform lives. Still processing everything, the young player looked at LeBron again, as if waiting for an explanation, confirmation that it wasn't a prank. But the star's firm and sincere gaze gave him the answer he needed. This was real. He had just received something priceless. And then, the impact began to spread throughout the locker room, in ways no one could have predicted. It was as if the weight of that moment had finally hit everyone at once. The locker room, previously filled with disbelief, began to transform. The penny dropped, and with it came an overwhelming wave of emotion. The young player, still holding his shirt, lowered his head, took a deep breath, but couldn't hold back the tears. They began to run down his face without him being able to stop it. And he wasn't the only one. One of the team's veterans, a man known for his coolness on the court, blinked several times, trying to hide his teary eyes. Another player put his hand on the back of his head, turned his back for a moment, took a deep breath. But when he turned around again, his eyes were already shining. The trainer crossed his arms, swallowed hard, and shook his head slowly, taking it all in. The heavy silence that dominated the locker room now gave way to something completely different. It was at that moment that someone started to clap, a firm, respectful sound coming from the back of the room. In a matter of seconds, the entire locker room followed. The claps echoed as a kind of recognition, as if each player was expressing without needing words how great LeBron's gesture had been. It wasn't just about the gift, the shirt, or the letter. It was about what it meant. That moment wasn't about fame, trophies, or million-dollar contracts. It was about legacy. About understanding that an athlete's greatness is not just in his achievements on the court, but in the impact he leaves on those who come after. LeBron, with a simple but incredibly powerful attitude, showed that his mission was not just to win games, but to inspire. He not only made history, but ensured that history lived on in the eyes and hearts of those who played alongside him. The applause continued for a few seconds, until one by one, the players began to approach the young athlete. Some gave him a hug, others a firm handshake, as if they wanted to give him even more strength, and through it all, LeBron just watched. He knew that this was a moment that would be remembered forever, but what no one knew yet was how it would impact the team from now on. Something had changed, and the reflection of this would be seen very soon. When the applause calmed down and the players began to breathe normally again, something was different in the air. The atmosphere in the locker room was no longer the same. Before, there was tension, the pressure of a big game, the weight of responsibility. Now there was something new, a feeling of unity, a deep understanding that that team was not just a group of players gathered to seek victories. They were family, and LeBron's gesture had made that clearer than ever. Basketball, like any team sport, is not just about individual talent. It's not enough to have the best players if they aren't connected by something bigger than the game. What LeBron did that day broke invisible barriers. He showed that, regardless of their position on the court, experience, or number of titles won, everyone there had a story, a personal struggle that often went unnoticed. He reminded each of them that their success could not exist without the other. The looks between the players said it all. They saw each other differently now. That young athlete, who before perhaps was just another newcomer trying to find his space, was now seen as someone with a great future. And not just him. Everyone began to reflect on their own journeys. Each one remembered the sacrifices they made to get there, the difficulties they faced and the people who along the way helped them continue. LeBron's gesture wasn't just about inspiring one player, but about strengthening an entire team. The coach realized this quickly. He saw in the eyes of his athletes that something had changed. That night's game was no longer just a confrontation on the court. They now had a deeper reason to get in there and do their best. It wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about honoring that journey, about repaying every effort made to make them there. LeBron had lit a fire inside each of them, a flame that wouldn't go out anytime soon. And as they began to prepare to leave the locker room and enter the court, a new type of energy took over the environment. They weren't just talented players. Now, they were a group with a greater purpose. And that would make all the difference when the ball went into play. The story was not confined to the locker room. The impact of that moment was so profound that, within a few hours, it began to spread far beyond the walls of that gym. The first sign came from the players themselves. Some, still overcome with emotion, discreetly shared details of what happened, with close friends and family. But it was when a journalist, always attentive to the behind-the-scenes of the team, realized that something special had happened, that the story began to gain momentum. Initially, the information appeared as rumors. Vague comments that LeBron James had done something unexpected, something that shook the entire team. But it didn't take long for someone in the locker room to confirm it was real. LeBron had made a gesture that deeply touched his teammates, and this was already reflecting on the team's energy. When the story finally broke, social media exploded. The news took over the sports media. TV programs, specialized portals, and commentators began to discuss the meaning of what had happened. In a world where the spotlight is constantly on the achievements on the court, a gesture as human and genuine as that stood out in a unique way. It wasn't about a great play, a broken record, or an impressive statistic. It was about character, leadership, and the impact of a true idol beyond sport. Journalists and former players joined the conversation. Some have compared LeBron to sports legends who, at the height of their careers, used their influence to transform lives. Others highlighted how attitudes like this strengthen team spirit and create bonds that go far beyond basketball. But what caught the most attention was the fan reaction. On social media, thousands of messages appeared every minute, full of admiration, respect, and inspiration. The repercussion was so great that even athletes from other sports commented on what happened. NFL players, baseball stars, and even MMA champions praised LeBron's attitude, highlighting how an athlete's true legacy is not only measured by titles, but by the way he impacts the people around him. The gesture had already transformed the team. Now he began to inspire the whole world, and the most impressive thing was that this was still just the beginning. Something even bigger was about to happen. As soon as the story spread, the reactions were immediate. Social media went into a real frenzy, with thousands of fans commenting on LeBron's gesture. Many did not believe what they were reading, having to check several sources before understanding the depth of what had happened. Fan comments flooded digital platforms. Some talked about how this attitude showed that LeBron was much more than an athlete, but a leader on and off the court. Others highlighted that this type of attitude is what truly defines a sporting legend. Sports journalists were not left out either. Big names in the press analyzed the impact of what had happened, highlighting how LeBron's attitude further reinforced his role as one of the sport's greatest icons. Some columnists wrote moving texts about the importance of leaders like him in the world of basketball, highlighting that his greatness was not limited to numbers and records. On TV sports programs, commentators discussed how this gesture could further strengthen the team and motivate the players for the final stretch of the season. Former NBA players, many of them basketball legends, also spoke out. Some past stars who played against LeBron used their social media to praise the star's attitude. One of them stated that, despite having faced LeBron many times on the court, it was off the court that he showed his true greatness. Another former athlete, now a commentator for a major broadcaster, declared that he had never seen a player of LeBron's caliber do something so meaningful for a teammate in such a spontaneous way. Among fans, admiration only grew. On discussion forums, thousands of people analyzed every detail of LeBron's gesture, from handing over the shirt to the handwritten letter. Many shared personal stories of how they were inspired by the star, reinforcing the idea that he was a role model inside and outside of basketball. It was one of those rare moments when the sporting world came together in one feeling: respect. And while all this was happening, LeBron himself, always discreet about his actions off the court, remained silent. He did not insist on giving interviews or delving deeper into the subject. For him, the impact of that gesture did not need to be explained. But what no one knew was that that moment would have a direct impact on the team's next big challenge. Something had changed, and that would become clear in the match to come. Now tell me, have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment when a simple gesture completely changed the way you saw someone? Have you ever been in a situation where an unexpected attitude made you respect someone even more? LeBron James's story shows that true greatness goes far beyond talent or titles, but I want to hear from you. Have you ever seen something similar happen? Have you ever had someone do something so remarkable that it changed your perspective on them? Share your experience in the comments, because often the most inspiring stories come from ordinary people like you. I'm going to read each one, and I'm sure other people will also be moved by what you have to say. Now tell me, have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment when a simple gesture completely changed the way you saw someone? Have you ever been in a situation where an unexpected attitude made you respect someone even more? LeBron James's story shows that true greatness goes far beyond talent or titles, but I want to hear from you. Have you ever seen something similar happen? Have you ever had someone do something so remarkable that it changed your perspective on them? Share your experience in the comments, because often the most inspiring stories come from ordinary people like you. I'm going to read each one, and I'm sure other people will also be moved by what you have to say. The tension before the match was no longer the same. Something had changed in the team, and it was visible on each player's faces as they warmed up on the court. The locker room, which had previously carried the pressure of a decisive game, now had a new kind of energy. There was a different sparkle in the athletes' eyes, a sense of purpose that transcended any game strategy. The impact of LeBron's gesture was still fresh, and no one wanted to waste the opportunity to turn that emotion into something concrete on the court. When the team entered to warm up, the fans quickly realized that something was different. The way the players communicated, the intensity of the movements, the posture of each one there. It wasn't just another game. That group was not the same one that had entered the locker room a few hours earlier. They were connected in a unique way, as if they now shared something greater than the simple desire to win. LeBron, for his part, was more focused than ever. But that time, it wasn't just him. The young player who received the shirt and the letter seemed to be filled with an internal fire. His appearance was different. His presence on the court was more intense. He moved with confidence, with a sparkle in his eyes that hadn't been there before. It was as if he had suddenly found something that was missing, something that gave him a new motivation to play. When the ball went up to start the game, the team showed that something had really changed. They played with more synchronization, more dedication, more purpose. Each pass seemed to have more precision, each throw more confidence, each defense more aggression. It wasn't just technique, it wasn't just strategy. It was a team that played for something bigger. The fans noticed this and reacted. The gym began to vibrate in a different way, fueled by that contagious energy coming from the players. And as the minutes passed, it became clear that this game would not be just another victory or defeat of the season. It would be a symbol of what happens when a group of athletes becomes a true family. LeBron's attitude wasn't just an isolated gesture. She had changed the mindset of everyone around him. And the reflection of that was there, stamped in every play, in every point, in every moment of that game. The final whistle echoed through the gym, but the feeling that gripped the team wasn't just about the result on the scoreboard. Something had been built there, something that could not be measured by numbers or statistics alone. The players looked at each other as they left the court, exhausted, but with the certainty that that night had been different. There was a new fire inside them, a new understanding of what it meant to be together, to wear that shirt and fight for something bigger than just a victory. LeBron walked slowly through the locker room access tunnel, observing his teammates' reaction. He didn't need to say anything. The impact of what happened in the last few days was still strong, and he knew that that transformation would not end there. The young player who had received his gift walked beside him, his eyes shining, still absorbing everything he was experiencing. The basketball world had already become aware of this story, and the repercussion only grew. But within that group, what really mattered was not the spotlight. That's what it meant to them as a team, as brothers on and off the court. Because, at the end of the day, the legacy of a true leader is not just written in the trophies he lifts, but in the people he transforms along the way. And this story? Well, it's not over yet. If you've made it this far, we want to know how this video touched your heart. Comment below and share how this message spoke to you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue receiving transformative content. Leave a like to support this mission, and of course watch the next video that is already on the final screen. See you there.